Wow, thank you, man. Thank you, Crystal. Hi, friends. Thank you for being with us. It means so much to gather with you in this season. So, a little personal history. I grew up in Panama City, Florida, on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. And growing up, I had to get to school by driving across the bay, across the one bridge in the town that connected one side to the other. And I say the one bridge in the town because literally the next closest bridge was about an hour to the north. And so that one bridge in our city was essential. In fact, if there was ever a fender bender on the bridge and traffic shut down, you just have to shut down life and work and school and everything. It's pretty much like in Texas when it snows, right? Just shut it all down. And life was fine on my side of the bridge, and so taking a snow day or a bridge day off wasn't too bad. But if you wanted to connect to the other side, you needed a bridge. And I mention that because we know how important bridges are in our lives. And we know how important bridges are in our relationships, how important it is to connect with each other across distance and divide. We also know how difficult it is when those bridges aren't working. And right now in our world, it seems like there are so many divides and distances, and that some of our bridges aren't working. In our world, and it may seem that way in our lives and our relationships as well, and it is no small thing. It is hard, and it is deeply hard. And part of that difficulty comes from the fact that we know that this is not the way it's supposed to be. At the heart of it all, in some way, we are bound together. As Dr. King wrote in Letter from a Jail in Birmingham, in a real sense, we're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, he writes. Tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. And in some inescapable way, when garments tear and bridges fail, we are less than we should be. Less than if we were living into the fullness of our mutuality. This is, as Dr. King says, the interrelated structure of reality, and it's the necessity of our bridges. And so we're beginning a new series called How to Build a Bridge. And it is honestly a hard thing to sit with right now. I wrestle. But I know also that this is exactly what I need to be wrestling with. What we need to be wrestling with right now, because there is no place that the love of God does not want to go, and no distance that it does not seek to span. And in that, Jesus challenges me. Jesus' love challenges me. And every time I think I should just stay over on my little island alone, I mean, Gilligan didn't have it too bad after all. There are many days that I would take the 3-hour tour for sure. And some of us, besides, are already rocking quarantine hair and making friends with volleyballs at our house. It's not so bad. But every time I think that maybe the deserted island is where I need to be, I hear Jesus' invitation to love my neighbor as I love myself. And it stops me. And I remember how Jesus loved without separation or distinction and went to those who were distant. And even with clear boundaries, kept his heart open to those who stood against him, and loved them and looked on them with tenacious hope and patient mercy, and loved in a way that lifted us beyond what is to just glimpse what can be and will be, to a place where we could just begin to glimpse the interconnected garment of destiny and the glimmer of the beloved community. And Jesus did it without ever compromising his compassionate love, his moral courage, or his message of justice and joy and peace. Jesus' love challenges me, and I'm glad for it. Because in this world of distance and division, Jesus' love calls us to be different. And it calls us, among the many things that love calls us to in our world today, it calls us also to the work of bridge building. And so one of the folks who followed in Jesus' way is a leader named Paul, who, get this, used to literally hunt down Jesus followers. But then Paul experienced his own trial and life struggle. And in a time of need, Paul was welcomed by the Jesus community, who were cautious, certainly, but did not turn him away Instead, they built a bridge that he could walk across to find healing and reparation and transformation. And that person, Paul, experienced and was transformed by the power of people who did not give up on bridges, but instead let love lead them on. And so that person, Paul, wrote this to us of what Jesus' love calls us to. He writes this in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. From now on, he says, therefore, we regard no one from a human point of view, even though we once knew Christ from a human point of view. We know him no longer in that way. He says we used to regard each other in human ways, completely dominated by our distances and our differences, but we are called to a different point of view. That challenging point of view that regards all as children of God, of sacred worth, beautiful in our diversity, and united in our humanity. And so he goes on. He says, all of this is from God, who reconciled us to God through Christ and has given us the ministry of reconciliation, entrusting the message of reconciliation to us. And so we are ambassadors for Christ, since God is making an appeal through us. It says in the same way that we've been reconciled, we've been given the ministry of reconciliation. And so what does that word reconciliation mean? Well, it's the ministry of building bridges, of reconnecting and reweaving that garment that has been torn. The Greek word for reconciliation is katalasso, and it means literally to exchange. And it refers to the exchange of a relationship, the exchange of a relationship of hostility for a relationship of peace and mutuality. It means to exchange hostility for peace-seeking and to exchange division for the hope of a bridge that might reconnect us. Importantly, reconciliation is not a word that pretends that everything is fine. Instead, it speaks of exchanging hostility for peace, recognizing clearly that there are times when real hostility occurred. It's not about sweeping wrong under the rug, but seeking to uncover hostility that love might move in and bring transformation and change, real change. And that real change requires recognition of the wrong, repair of the reasons, and removal of obstacles so that reconciliation might one day occur in those places where change brings peace. Reconciliation is the goal, not the starting point. And this is important to say as well, that peace is the end of reconciliation, that shalom peace that brings holistic flourishing to our lives. And I want to be clear on this. There are some relationships in our lives that do not bring flourishing. They bring harm. And love does not ask us to restore those harmful relationships to where they were before. No, not at all. Love and abuse cannot coexist, period. In fact, sometimes what the peace of reconciliation looks like is the peace of being set free from a harmful or abusive relationship. To know that we're not confined or defined by that, and to, in our own lives, exchange the hurt of hostility for the power and the possibility of peace. And to walk across a bridge, not back to the past of those harmful relationships, but ahead to the freedom of the future and to the loving, protective arms of the God of all peace, who stands against abuse and coercion and harm. And so I want to make that clear to us. Amen? Amen. Yet in those places where it is possible and it is life-giving, reconciliation is a powerful word, perhaps one of the most beautiful words in our spiritual vocabulary, because it's a word full of the tenacious hope and a God whose love can bridge divides and grow goodness and heal distance, roll away stones and build bridges where they seemed impossible. Love can exchange hostility for peace. And so maybe you right now can think of a relationship that needs exchange, that needs a beginning step of changing out hostility and in its place, seeking peace. Saint Therese of Lisieux, one of the mothers of our faith, who also incidentally wrote the text to You Are Love and Love Alone, a song that we sing often together, Saint Therese of Lisieux wrote in her journal of one of our fellow nuns who managed to irritate me whatever she did or said until all I could see was the many disagreeable traits in her. I mean, I've been there. Actually, I'm pretty sure I've pretty much been on the other side of things more often, actually. But Therese was like us in that relationship, challenged by the love of God. And so she continues, I did not want to give way to my natural dislike for her. I told myself that love should not only be a matter of feeling, but should show itself in deeds. So I set myself to do for this sister just what I would have done for someone I loved most dearly. She tried to treat her first as someone she loved and exchange her frustration and hostility first for charity and love, loving her neighbor as someone dearly loved. And it took work, it took struggle, it took building a structure of love that reached across all those very real things that stretched them apart. Therese let love in the ministry of reconciliation begin to build a bridge. And so she writes this after years of seeking to love her neighbor. And after all this, she asked me one day with a beaming face, Sister Therese, will you please tell me what attracts you so much to me? You give me such a charming smile whenever we meet. Ah, it was Jesus hidden in the depth of her soul who attracted me. Jesus who makes the bitterest things sweet. Isn't that beautiful? What attracted her? What built the bridge? It was seeing the sacredness hidden in the depth of her soul, taking the time to seek it and see it and uncover it. And sometimes it may be hidden so deep that we just have to lean into the faith that it is there. But it is the Jesus hidden in the depth of each of our souls that connects us. And sometimes it takes intentionally exchanging hostility for a heart that seeks to see the sacredness in the other. And then to build a bridge there, to connect those two places. Because you don't just build bridges anywhere. There are things in others that we do not want to connect to, that bridges should not span, and boundaries must be drawn and guardrails put up. And just like an engineer does not place a bridge just anywhere, but instead looks for just the right location to connect one shore to the other. When we find those places that connect us to each other, and what can be more sacred and connecting than simply our shared humanity? When we find those places, bridges can be built. Build them there. With your family or your friends or your coworkers, there may be so much distance, but where can you build? Don't look as much at the chasm between you as to the connection between you. Where can you connect? Where can you begin? Where can you build a bridge? And when you do, when you make a bridge that love can travel, it will. Love will. It may not always end up with a Pollyanna bow on top, but it is always better than if love had never passed that way. Not every bridge I've built has come to much, but some have. Some have come to very much. And I've never been sorry that I've tried. So I had a neighbor who was different than me in many ways. We worked different kinds of jobs, had different kinds of hobbies, and we had different kinds of bumper stickers on our cars, let's just say. And at first, in our neighborly relationship, I was just keeping my distance. And then some preacher kept talking about how Jesus said, love your neighbor. And I was like, okay, I guess. And so I tried. Nothing big. I just tried to build a bridge when I saw an opportunity for a connection. The Mavs on TV, the weather outside, etc. Eventually, we got around to talking about our stories and talking church just a little bit. It was neighborly. I never imagined that it would be anything more than a little footbridge between our metaphorical driveways. But love travels even those bridges. Sometime later, his teenage daughter began to talk to her dad and be honest with her dad about who she was and who she loved. And so one day, my neighbor stopped me in the driveway and said, hey, tell me about your church. Do you have a youth group where my daughter could go? And we did. And she could. And that rickety footbridge that we'd constructed out of Texas weather and Dirk Nowitzki small talk became a bridge that love could travel across, became a little bridge in the ministry of reconciliation. An unexpected bridge that love traveled. And this story isn't about me and my bridge building prowess. Definitely not. I am a dork who is no good at small talk. No, not at all. But instead, this is about the reconciling work of the God who connects us all, about love and life and hope and the faithfulness of the God who is at work for peace in a world of hostility, who's working reconciliation and holistic flourishing, whose love will travel across any rickety bridge that we can build, and whose love it is that builds those bridges in the first place. We are ambassadors of a God whose heart is for us all, each of us and all of us, together in this garment of mutuality. And so this work is hard, no doubt. And there are places where it is deeply personal. But I want to tell you that you are not alone. And so I love that the verse we read today is communal and plural throughout. The message of reconciliation is entrusted to us. We are ambassadors for Christ. This work is not for you to do alone. We are in this together and standing for each other, standing in solidarity in our bridge building work, and there to pick each other up when the bridges strain under their load. And even more than the solidarity of this community, the heart of God is with you. You're not alone. You are joined by the deepest forces in the universe, the love of a God who is at work for us and before us and between us all, the God whose love wins. All this is from God, Paul writes, who reconciled us to God through Christ and has given us the ministry of reconciliation. This is the work of the heart of God, who's at work step by step, bridge by bridge. The God who is connecting us all. The God who is the connections between us all. We're tied in a single garment of destiny. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be, and you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. And this is the call of love to us in our time. Insofar as we are able, may we be bridge builders so that God's love might connect us all, and so that together we can be who we are becoming. In the love of God always. Amen.